Welcome back, everybody, to Learn Too Late. Whether you're going through IVF or you're thinking about hormones, appointments, pregnancy tests, you're probably not thinking about what happens to your embryos if you get divorced, if you die, if you move states, if you disagree with your partner, but maybe you should be. So today's guest is Ashleigh Dunham. She is a fertility attorney and IVF mom, and most importantly, right now, a candidate for the Alabama Supreme Court. So after experiencing IVF herself and watching really fertility law become front page news, she's helping families navigate questions that a lot of us don't even know we're supposed to ask. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to get to know a little bit more about IVF law, your run for office, and who you are and what you do. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is uncharted territory for a lot of people. And honestly, a lot of people don't even know the difference between an embryo and an egg at this point.
I learned so much about my body going through the IVF process that I just thought, did I even go to school? I mean, there are just things that you have no idea that your body, I think, as a woman can do. For men, it's a little bit more simple, but when what's a cervix? What's your embryo? Your uterus, like all of these different things, like we have so many steps in the process of getting pregnant, having children, just everything, all of it is so complicated. And I think that there are so few options and times where we're actually talking about it. And I do that now with my daughter. Like I'm always using real scientific language of, hey, this is where your uterus is. Here are your ovaries. They make eggs, they're fertilized by daddy's sperm, like all these sort of things, because I feel like I missed out on that. Did you grow up in a really open household where those sort of things were discussed, or was it later in life that you learned about how your body worked?
Honestly, I don't think we really ever talked about it. I mean, in the South, you don't talk about those things. And that's something that, I've learned recently is how much they just don't want you to know about like reproduction in general. And
Right.
I mean, they even just pretty much made like just last year or this last session, yeah, they said, we're going to do abstinence only education. And that for people who end up having to go through fertility treatment, those, one in six people who have to go through fertility treatment, that is such a disservice to them because you had no idea. Like when I got married, I learned that by the time you're 30, 90% of your eggs are gone. And you don't talk about these things. And you don't talk about egg health. And you don't talk about just in general, all you hear about is how easy it is to get pregnant. You never hear about how hard it is to get pregnant. And so when your body doesn't do what everybody's telling you it's just going to do so easily, you feel like your body failed you. And that's why there's so much shame in talking about most of this and why people don't know the basics. They don't know, what an ovary does. They don't know what an egg is. They don't know whether like what a period is. Honestly, it's really sad. And I I even saw like there was an executive order recently that said that talking about sex ed is indoctrination. It's mind-boggling. But yet, in the 34 to 36 states, I can't remember which because it's, changing every so often, 34 to 36 states, children can get married. So it's like, why aren't we talking about reproductive health care? Why aren't we talking about like what's going on in their bodies when they can actually start making babies? And why aren't we talking about taking care of your reproductive health care?
Well, I think there's so much of it where if you deeply and profoundly understand how your body works, you are so better equipped to handle and navigate every aspect of fertility, getting pregnant, not getting pregnant, what to do if that does happen, when you can get pregnant. And I mean, that's the crazy thing is it's damn near impossible to get pregnant. And the fact that we get pregnant by accident is just unbelievable to me. And then you have people who also just really struggle or they have fertility issues and really we really just have both ends of the spectrum, but we're not educating young women about what their bodies do and how to navigate that. So you specialize in fertility law. What is a fertility attorney?
So I handle making families. So I like to make a joke that I'm a recovering divorce attorney. So I did family law for the longest time. And then when I went through 5 years of fertility treatment myself, I started talking to my doctor about certain things. And two of my nurses were, one of them was donating her eggs to the other one. And people don't even realize you can do that. So I had my two of my surgery nurses, one that was in recovery, one that was during surgery. One was donating her eggs to the other one. And so that's what I handle, are contracts around donating eggs, donating sperm, donating embryos, and surrogacy. So when you have a surrogacy situation where somebody carries a baby for someone, they have to also, first of all, there's a contract that goes into place that is like around 80 pages long. And then in addition to that contract, you have to do parentage to say who the real parents are, because it's not just who gives birth anymore. And that, let me tell you, if you talk to the legislature about that, I mean, they cannot understand that we women can take eggs out of our body and give it to somebody else. They don't even understand egg retrievals. They don't understand embryos. And so that's what I do, is I make families every single day. I talk to people about, what they've gone through, whether it's cancer treatment or that they just have had numerous stillbirths, or that their husband went through cancer, doesn't have sperm, or, that some kind of issue, some medical issue that has happened where they cannot reproduce on their own. And so they need a little bit of extra help. And that's what I do. And I actually just did, I'm working on a contract right now that's purely altruistic. The surrogate's not getting paid anything, but, the person that she's helping had a horrible medical situation and they would not be able to become parents otherwise.
There's so much discussion around not getting pregnant and how do you create those embryos, but no one really talks about what happens after the fact. So I feel like I was one of the really fortunate people. So I did IVF to eliminate a gene mutation that I carry. And so when I was looking for the gene mutation, not only did my potential embryos, the ones that I was discarding, they had the gene mutation, but they also had chromosomal abnormalities at the same time. So I wasn't just discarding some embryo that maybe carried a theoretical dangerous, thing for my kids. They also were incompatible with human life. But there are people who end up in a case where they have 10 viable embryos, and are they going to have 10 kids? I mean, it's just a conversation that we really need to talk about. And so they do get to a point where they say, okay, maybe I've got two, three children, my family planning is done. What do I do with these embryos that, depending on how religious you are, how you feel about it can be human life. And so do you discard these and essentially toss them in the trash? Do you donate them to science? A lot of places don't let you do that anymore. Or what you talked about is, embryo donation, is gifting this embryo to another family. Do you see this happening more and more often, or do you think people are less willing to do it because of the legal implications that come along with it?
So, like I said, I did my first like 15 years litigating as a divorce attorney. And then I slowly started getting into this. And I see more and more people who are choosing the route of embryo donation. And it is because there are a lot of people who, like, I was not lucky. I was not a lucky one myself. I went through IVF twice and got zero embryos. And they told me that was, that's unheard of. But that is something that, when you start dabbling in reproductive healthcare in general and start putting a life, saying that it is a life immediately, you start causing ramifications for things like IVF. So in Alabama, we're so restrictive when it comes to reproductive health care and terminations, that then leads to us not having what we need for IVF. So I had to leave the state in order to get any embryos. But there are lots of people who go through IVF and end up with 10, 15 embryos, and they're like, I can't have 10 or 15 kids. What am I supposed to do? And so, though, yeah, they typically will start leading to, they either will do embryo donations, or there are a lot of people who donate them to science because, we're constantly benefiting from people donating embryos to science, especially if you don't know what that grade is. I mean, your embryos may not be compatible with life. You don't know. I did genetic testing on mine, but that was because I was a carrier for Tay-Sachs. So,
Mm.
I didn't even know that, and luckily my husband isn't, so it was very unlikely that that was gonna be an issue. 3 of our 4 embryos were they were perfect, and so now 2 of our embryos are still in Colorado. But, I mean, you see all this happening that people don't even think about, like, what happens after you leave the clinic. They go in there happy-go-lucky, they don't have any legal advice, they're just signing these forms that say things like, if we get divorced, then she gets the embryos or he gets the embryos. Or if we get divorced, we want to donate them to science. And then, what happens if he cheats and she's left? She is at the end of her reproductive health care time period, and they've got 5 embryos in storage, and he's like, get rid of them. And then she's sitting there saying, but this is my only chance to become a mom. We created those when we were happy. And the clinic paperwork may say one thing, but you don't have anybody there with you when you're filling it out. And, every other state in the United States says that embryos are a special type of property, except for Alabama, because we decided to say, hold my beer. Embryos are a life. They are a child, and they're in cryogenic nurseries, and they should be protected no matter what.
Before we hop into your run, I would love to talk about sort of the basics of this because I think there are a lot of people, especially our listeners, who are in that age range of potentially navigating IVF, and no one really talks, like you said, about who owns an embryo. So, maybe outside of Alabama, are embryos legally considered property?
Yeah, so they're like extra special property. So they are seen as, I mean, they are your genetic material outside of your body that you own. So the year before Alabama went a little crazy, there was a case in Georgia, and it was a wife and a husband. And in their clinic paperwork, it said that if they could not agree on what to do with an embryo, that it would be destroyed. And then they went to the court and they argued about who should get that embryo. And the wife said, well, I did so much more than him. Like, he just went in this cup. What I did was I went through years and years of changing my diet. I did the shots. I had to have procedures done. And I did all this stuff to get this embryo. And so after that, the lower court said, well, the wife did so much more. She gets the embryo. And then it goes to the Court of Appeals in Georgia, and Georgia says, it said back in that paperwork that if they don't agree, get rid of it. We're getting rid of it. So they decided to destroy it. And then you look at other places and they do things like, what did you sign in the paperwork? So they first look at, what the contract is at the clinic. So if the clinic says get rid of it, or if the clinic says wife gets it or husband gets it, that's what happens. But there's this exception that's called the balancing test that a lot of places do, where they balance your right not to be a parent. So, like, if you don't want to become a parent to this embryo versus your right, like the other person's ability to become a parent without using that embryo. So, like, say that the wife went through medical treatment and she had already created all these embryos and now she would never become a mom because of it. Then at that point in time, like, if she can't become a mom without those embryos, then the court would award the embryos to her.
Is this a really emotionally difficult job for you? Because I can imagine, I mean, I've been on the side of creating the embryos. I know what it's like to go through all of that, to do the shots. I can understand a woman's perspective of like, hey, I did this, like maybe I'm past the threshold for having peak fertility. I want access to these embryos. But you also think on the other side, you have somebody who's like, if we're not in a relationship, I don't want my living, breathing DNA, my child walking around potentially in this world. Like, what a messy area of law to be involved in. What drew you to that?
Well, honestly, it's the public not knowing anything about fertility treatment and not understanding it at all. And so, like, when I would handle divorces where they had embryos, I would walk in there and I would say this, and this, and I would I mean, most seasoned attorneys that you could possibly find, I would go toe to toe with them and explain to them, listen, this is what you have to go through. This is how much it costs. If he cheated on her and he doesn't want to use that embryo anymore, then he pays for her to use donor sperm at this point in time. We're going to create more embryos. And so I would always be able to find more creative solutions, because I was well-rounded in this field, and this is something that's growing. It's not like our fertility rates are getting any better. I mean, we are getting to the point where, I mean, it's just getting worse and worse. I read one study that said by 2050, 40% of society will have to use fertility treatment to create a family. And that's because we're letting corporations, pump chemicals into everything. But we're not fixing that. We're not fixing that, and so it's just getting worse and worse. And so for me, yes, it is emotionally charged, but I feel like when what I went through, 5 years of just pain and suffering and just a very difficult time period for me, it gave it meaning.
Absolutely. Let's do like a little bit of a 180 here. What happens if one spouse dies unexpectedly? Can the surviving spouse use those embryos? What about in a case like that?
So that of course varies as well across state lines. A lot of times you can. Like I've actually had cases where people come to me where there's stored sperm and there's stored sperm and she wants to be able to use that sperm to create embryos and she has to go through an estate to open an estate in order to get that sperm. So, I mean, that's part of that technically in a lot of states. I mean, it is part of the estate. And in Alabama, it is a child through and through.
Is there any situation where someone could force you to keep your embryos frozen forever? I know that there's sort of conversation about that in more conservative states of like, okay, I've created 10 embryos. I got three kids from the three embryos. I now have seven left. It's either you have to use those or they're stuck in a freezer and you're paying cryogenic freezing payments for the rest of your life. Does that happen to people? Can they transfer them out of state and then do something different, or are they stuck?
Okay, so it's ironic that you asked that because in Alabama, right after the IVF decision came down, some of the judges who had entered orders that where the people agreed to destroy their embryos, they set their order aside and they said, you can't destroy those anymore. Those are children. And so luckily, that couple had already shipped their embryos out of state. And so, yes, in places like Alabama, you you are supposed to keep those cryogenic nurseries ongoing to take care of your children until you do something with those embryos, whether it's transfer them or send them to someone else, or send them out of state, which most of our clinics have actually shut down. We have about, 5 left, but technically 3 that are really, really ongoing clinics. But the most of them send all of their embryos out of state to be kept in like storage facilities in places like in Atlanta or Colorado because they don't want to, one, be held liable for something happening to the embryo in their cryogenic nursery, or because they don't want to have to deal with anything with the couple making a decision. So if the couple decides that they want to destroy them, they're like, we're not touching it. We're not touching it at all. There's actually one clinic here who will not ship an embryo to a storage facility that does destroy them. So
Wow,
you have no choice over what you do with your genetic material.
that's dystopian. Crazy situation. Yeah, that was my next question was what role do IVF clinics play? Because I know, my clinic was based in DC, so it's relatively open-minded and I had all the flexibility in the world. But, you know, thinking about these laws and hearing them, come down, like those were my first thoughts of like, is it just legal implications coming down from the government, or are there actual clinics out there that are keeping people from being able to maybe transport their embryos or do what they want to with their own biological material?
There are clinics here in Alabama who will make you pay to store ship and store outside of the state embryos that are not genetically compatible with life. So
Wow.
people who get embryos that they know will not become a child, they still have to pay to ship them out of state.
Crazy. Well, I'd love to talk to you. Maybe this is a perfect segue for your run. You're running for the Alabama Supreme Court. I mean, obviously you can hear from this conversation, like lit the fire under your ass for doing this. Like what are you hoping to accomplish running for office?
So I just want to break up the echo chamber in the highest court. The problem is that, a lot of people don't realize that our IVF case that happened, I mean, it was coming for a long time. I actually interviewed with the governor's office shortly before that decision came down. And one of the attorneys with the attorney general's office asked me about the IVF decision and like what I thought about it. And I said, "You are treading in dangerous territory. You will shut down all the IVF clinics. They will not do anything for anybody anymore if y'all can say that this embryo being destroyed was a life, was a child. That is going to be a problem." And so when I saw that decision come down that said, hey, this law from 1872 can be applied to an embryo that says that if that is an embryo is a child. And I was like, well, IVF didn't exist back then, but that's fine. You want to call yourself originalists and then say that this original meaning of a law from 1872 applies to an embryo is wild. It's just wild. So I watched in real time as our clinics came to a halt. I watched as thousands of families lost access to care. And I personally, before this case even happened, my doctor told me, we don't have what you need to become a mother. You have to leave the state. And so I had already left the state in 2020 to fly across the nation to become a mom. So to see thousands of families who were subjected to political ideology over their ability to create their family and to become parents broke my heart. And I was just so sick of watching that. And so, I watched it go down. I watched how we were all of a sudden in the limelight and everybody's like, look at Alabama, look at what they've done. And so they decided, after 4 days, the legislature finally fixed. They put a Band-Aid on it, but we are still one case away from IVF stopping again. And not many people realize that, because what happened is they put a Band-Aid on it, but the law is unconstitutional. And there was actually a case, like the same case went back to court to declare that law unconstitutional and basically would stop IVF altogether again in January of 2025. So we almost lost IVF again in 2025. And I'm so sick of watching this echo chamber that's going on, watching all of these people who are putting ideology in front of people. And, my career has been fertility treatment, helping people with fertility cases, also divorce cases, but also I sat on the bench hearing child abuse and neglect cases. So I sat in the juvenile court, and I see real families every single day who are struggling to pay the bills. Real families every single day who are struggling with addiction, struggling with immigration issues, struggling with the ability to keep their house clean, to keep the lights on. And I'm just over it. I'm over people making decisions in this ivory tower that trickle down and stop medical care for people and make our state worse. I had thought about it for a really long time. I was like, how is this going to impact, my family, my only child? And honestly, if I don't win, I worry about the Alabama that we're going to have in 6 years. So in 6 years, she'll be entering into her most sensitive time period. She'll be going into a time when she may start her period. And under Alabama law, we have no exceptions for if somebody attacked her, no exceptions. So you're looking at just the life of the mom. And, somebody gets hurt, something else, happens. I don't want her subjected to that. And so I've just decided, because of all of that, everything just in my head, like, I'm done with it. I am done with this. I am done with the echo chamber. We need a disruptor. And that's what I want to be. And it's funny because people are like, well, how can somebody who is a blue dot in a very red sea make a difference? But I'm already seeing it. Like, I wrote an op-ed a couple of weeks ago, and shortly after I wrote it, one of the most conservative justices on our Supreme Court wrote a dissent that said basically what my op-ed had outlined, that we need to adapt our laws to modern families. And so I'm not saying that we're going to be the Scalia and RBG of, Alabama, but we could be. And that is something beautiful. I'm already making a change. So, yeah, it's taking a lot out of me, but that is why I decided to run.
No matter where your politics are, having anyone run for office because they're impacted by something that matters to them is a beautiful thing. And I mean, you see it, in California, like whether you love Spencer Pratt or not, like his house got burned down in the Palisades and he said, okay, let me do something about it. And so I feel like we're seeing more and more of that, of people who just get fired up by their own personal experience and they say, okay, enough. Like, if not me, then who? And so I really applaud you for doing what you're doing. I have two little girls now, and I feel like everything has changed for me. Looking at them, realizing how my children were so deeply and profoundly wanted. Going through IVF, spending my life savings, doing all of that to bring them into the world. And it is the hardest job in the world. And I come from such a place of privilege. I'm financially able to easily care for them. I'm able to stay at home if I want to. The touchy point for me is, okay, if you think that every life is a life, then it is your responsibility to help as a community care for that child. And so I'm living in Germany now, and it's this really interesting thing where like with IVF, it's illegal to do genetic testing because of, obviously everything that happened in World War II, like they just don't think it's an ethical thing to test embryos, and like I get it. But I had to travel across an ocean, go to a place where I was able to do that. But then on the flip side, you have things like Kindergeld here, which is, roughly translates to like children money. So every single person, regardless of your income, receives a stipend from the government every month to pay for basic necessities, diaper, childcare, food, etc. And so they're walking the walk with what they're doing. If they're saying, hey, it's important for us to have children, it's also important for us to take care of those children. And we as a society need to prioritize children, their lives, their comfort. And it's not, it doesn't make sense with capitalism. But that does not mean that it can't coexist with capitalism. It is just one of those things. It is part of the social contract theory. We need to provide for kids because they cannot provide for themselves. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's just a very, very sticky place to be in. Is there any particular part of legislation in Alabama where you're like, this would be my first 100 days, I want to impact this?
What we're seeing is because of the attacks on reproductive health care in general, like taking care of people's ability to make decisions with their own bodies, what we're seeing is that trickles down to maternal mortality. We are seeing that trickles down to doctors leaving, to all of these horrendous situations that are happening as far as these maternal health care deserts. 34% of the counties in Alabama are in a healthcare desert, which means that women have to drive over 30 minutes to get to a hospital, most of the time an hour and a half. You need someone there to say, hey, this is very important. This is how it could impact everybody across Alabama. This is how it could kill women if we don't actually do something right now.
Well, I'd love to hear from you. What is the fertility law question that people never think to ask prior to starting all of this?
Well, honestly, it goes back to that whole, embryo situation is what are we going to do when, when or if we have leftover embryos? Like, what are we going to do with them? And my husband and I talked about it over and over again, actually, and we said that we would probably donate our embryos to another couple. But now that I have my daughter and she keeps asking for a sibling, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. It's hard because going back to what's going on in Alabama, I'm terrified to be pregnant here. And I don't want to end up in a situation where I don't have, like, I'm not around for my daughter. And that makes me so sad. But, so it's really hard. You even going in to deciding what you want to do with those embryos, it's very abstract until you get to the point where you have to make that decision. And unfortunately, where we are in Alabama and a lot of other states, you don't get to make that decision anymore. But that is something that you probably need to really talk about and discuss it before you go in the clinic to make that decision.
What's the most common legal mistake that IVF patients make from your perspective?
That's a good question. Honestly, probably just being almost too optimistic. Um, I think a lot of people think of a simplistic approach to this. They think that, they get their surrogate, it's going to work, or they go in and they're going and doing their first transfer, it's going to work. I never thought, I never thought that we were going to have to go through 3 cycles of IVF to get our kid. I never thought we were going to have to leave the state to get our kid. I never thought that, we would be traveling in the middle of the pandemic on Thanksgiving Day across the entire US to have our kid. I never thought that I was going to be in a room with 5 people and my husband not being allowed to be in there because of the pandemic in order to get pregnant, So these are things, the human body is complicated and people don't think enough about it because all you hear about is teen pregnancy this and teen pregnancy that, or I accidentally got pregnant. And when you're on the other end of that spectrum, it's not that simple. And there's a lot that goes into it, like people don't think about the fact that everything you touch impacts your egg quality or your sperm quality. They don't think about, the food that you're eating or, plastics or BPA on receipts that you blot your lipstick on. Those are things that we aren't taught. And so we've got to just really, really do some soul searching and some science searching when it comes to IVF stuff.
What is the one question that every IVF patient should ask before they sign their paperwork?
I mean, honestly, it's again like looking at that, what needs to happen with these embryos? Like what happens if we die? What happens if, I have to do when it comes to my surrogacy contracts, I have to tell them like what happens if you go in a hot air balloon accident and nobody can find you and the surrogate's there with your baby? Who's going to take care of that baby? So, you have to think about what's going to happen in the future and you have to think about the hard questions too. Like what happens if, your husband passes away and you haven't even transferred any of your embryos yet. You've got 5 embryos to go. What happens? And that's hard, but you need to think about it. You can't just think about unicorn and rainbows and what's going to happen when you see the little baby toes. You have to think about the hard stuff.
What is something that people usually learn too late about IVF?
People have learned way too late is that what's happening in the South doesn't stay in the South. Just recently there's this case coming out of Louisiana talking about using mifepristone, which you use commonly for miscarriages and also for early stage abortions. And in Louisiana, they said that the FDA could no longer do telehealth appointments. It didn't stay in Louisiana because the FDA is a federal agency. So now what we're looking at is something happening in a very, very red state, causing issues for people in blue states, in purple states, everywhere. So people need to think about the South. They need to remember us.
Maybe we do a learn too late that's not related to IVF. What's something in your everyday life? Is there anything that you learned late where you were like, "Hey, I was today years old when I learned this"?
So I have a funny one, which is that, on Hocus Pocus, that Thackeray Binks is not Zachary, he's Thackeray. So that shook me to the core.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing. If there are people out there that would like to support you, whether it's, community support, financial support in your run, where can they find you?
So everything of mine is Ashleigh for Alabama, and it's spelled ASHLEIGH for Alabama. So that is TikTok, Instagram, Substack. And then on Facebook, it's the full, because older people watch on Facebook. So it's Ashleigh Dunham for Alabama Supreme Court Associate Justice. So it's a long one. And then my website is again ashleighforalabama.com.
If there's one thing that would really make an impact in your run right now, If there's somebody out there with unlimited resources, what can they do for you?
So right now, we just started a billboard campaign to start getting people out to vote. So honestly, just supporting in every way they possibly can, whether it is, reaching out and checking out, how they can donate, how they can, check out what we're doing, how they like reaching out to people in Alabama to even let them know there's an election. Because right now, our election process is so crazy. They just invalidated our primary, and we have a new primary August 11th. And then we also have a primary runoff June 16th. So it's like June 16th, August 11th, and November 3rd. So really just spreading the news of what's going on in Alabama and getting people out because we saw 200,000 more voters in the Democratic side this year. And that's huge. We saw some counties go up 200% in Democratic voters. So your vote matters. It really does matter, especially in state elections.
Well, thank you so much. Keep fighting the good fight and supporting IVF families. Appreciate it.
Thank you.